The sun burned cruelly over the red desert that afternoon, turning the world into fire and dust. The wind carried whispers of hate from the nearby town of Red Creek, a place where prejudice ran deeper than the rivers that no longer flowed. They called her half-blood, a slur spat with venom. Her name was Alina. Born of a native mother and a white settler father, she never belonged to either side. Her dark braids and sharp green eyes carried stories of both worlds, and for that, the townfolk marked her as a curse. That day, they dragged her through the dirt, shouting that she was a witch, that her mixed blood was poison. She did not fight back. Her wrists were bound, her face streaked with sweat and dust, yet her spirit stood tall. She looked at the horizon where the mountains kissed the sky, because that was freedom. They tied her wrists to a cottonwood branch, her toes barely grazing the cracked earth, a rough rope cutting into her skin. Beneath her feet, the ground waited for her fall. On a sign nailed to the tree were the words, "Half-bloods don't belong." The mob cheered as they pulled the rope tighter, but even then her eyes were defiant. She whispered a prayer in her mother's tongue, not for herself, but for forgiveness, for those who couldn't see past hate. Far off, a lone rider cut across the desert. His name was Colt Ramsey, a rancher known for his quiet strength and hands that built more than they broke. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was looking for peace, after years of losing both cattle and kin to the cruelty of men. But when he saw the scene by the tree, the girl, the rope, the mob, something inside him turned to iron. He reined in his horse, eyes narrowing under his hat's brim. The crowd didn't see him at first. They were too busy celebrating their cruelty. Colt dismounted slowly, his boots crunching against the dry earth. "That's enough," he said, his voice steady as a drawn gun. The crowd turned, laughter fading. "Ain't your concern, Ramsey," a man spat. "She don't belong here." Colt's hand went to his knife. "Then maybe you're in the wrong place," he said. Without another word, he strode to the tree, ignoring their shouts. The rope creaked above as Alina gasped for air. Colt's knife flashed in the sunlight, slicing the rope clean. She fell into his arms, coughing, barely conscious, her skin bruised, but her fire unbroken. The mob hesitated, their courage trembling before the steel in his eyes. Colt turned toward them, his voice low and sharp. "Next man who raises a hand to her will answer to me." They backed away one by one, knowing better than to test him. He lifted Alina onto his horse, her head resting weakly against his shoulder, and rode toward the fading light. The wind swallowed the whispers behind them, and for the first time, Alina didn't feel like prey. She felt seen. As night fell over the desert, Colt made camp near a ridge. He cleaned her wounds with trembling hands, careful not to frighten her. When she opened her eyes, confusion and fear clouded them. "Why?" she whispered hoarsely. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Because no one deserves to hang for who they are." She turned her gaze to the fire, silent tears falling. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen to save her, not out of pity, but out of conviction. The stars above shimmered like promises unspoken, and in the quiet crackle of the flames, destiny began to stir. The days that followed were a blur of healing and silence. Colt's ranch sat at the edge of nowhere, a stretch of golden land kissed by the sun and guarded by the mountains. It was peaceful but lonely, a reflection of the man who owned it. Alina stayed in the small cabin near the barn, her body still recovering from the rope burns and the trauma that clung to her like shadows. She barely spoke, afraid that her presence would bring more danger. But Colt was patient. He'd bring her water each morning, leave bread and stew by the fire, and never asked her for gratitude. One evening she finally asked, "You know what they'll say if they find out you're sheltering me?" Colt looked up from his work, eyes calm. "They've said worse," he replied. "But I don't live for their approval." That was the first time she smiled, a small, fragile curve of her lips that made something shift in his chest. Soon, Alina began to help around the ranch, feeding the horses, mending tack, tending to the small garden by the porch. The land seemed to welcome her, the animals calmer when she was near. Colt watched her often, not out of curiosity but admiration. She moved with grace and strength, the kind that came from surviving hell and choosing not to be hardened by it. But danger wasn't done with them yet. One evening, a group of townsmen rode up to the ranch, their torches flickering in the twilight. "We came for the half-breed," their leader sneered. Colt stepped forward, his shotgun resting on his shoulder. "She's not yours to take," he said coldly. "She don't belong here," the man spat. Colt's jaw tightened. "She does now." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. They saw it in his eyes, the promise that he'd die before he let them touch her again. The men rode off into the darkness, leaving only the echo of their hate. That night, Alina stood by the corral, tears glistening in her eyes. "You risked your life for me," she said. Colt stepped closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You don't owe me anything," he whispered. "You're safe here. As long as I breathe, no one will ever hang you again." Her heart trembled at the weight of his words. She looked up at him, her voice breaking. "Then what am I to you?" His hand tilted her chin gently. "Mine," he said, not as a claim, but as a vow, a promise that she would never be alone again. The dawn rose pink and gold across the ranch, painting a new beginning. Alina walked barefoot through the soft earth, feeling freedom for the first time in her veins. The tree that once held her still stood far out in the desert, but now it was nothing more than a shadow of the past. Together, they rebuilt not just the land, but their souls, proving that love born from pain could grow into something unbreakable.